Good evening and welcome to this week's edition of Behind the Headlines for Wednesday the 22nd of January 2022, and in this programme we'll be talking about Regan's and my foreign adventures, Regan's to the South American country of Colombia on a missionary journey, and myself to Israel on part of the government press office sponsored visit on behalf of the Israeli Prime Minister's office. So we'll be unpacking why it's so important to visit countries and to gain a deeper understanding of the issues they face. So when we discuss these issues, we know more because we have the personal connections and we've seen these countries for ourselves. Regan, it feels like it's been a while since we've done a Behind the Headlines, so it's great to be back with you today.
Yeah, it's good to be here, Simon, and I think we have a lot to share from our respective journeys. Honestly, one of my favorite things to do is travel, and especially when it involves sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and meeting people, hearing what they're doing in their own environment in regard to ministry, and honestly, amazing time in Colombia. I think you had a good time in Israel.
Yeah, very good. It was a good adventure. Yeah, definitely. So just share with us how your opportunity came about to actually go to Colombia, because, you know, for our viewers watching, you know, I think of drugs when I think of Colombia. I think of drug barons. I think of you know, the FARC and the rebel guerrillas. I think of also great coffee, and also, of course, the Colombian entertaining football team of Colombia as well. So I've never been to South America. It's definitely a continent that I would love to visit. So how did your missionary visit to Colombia come about?
It's interesting, and the trajectory of the trip actually starts a few years ago. There's a picture of myself with a few people sat around a table from our first day in Colombia that features, there you have it. So there's a couple of us from the church, the Angel Church, in that photograph. My friend over on the left-hand side, far left-hand side, Jose, he is one of our faithful members and dedicated volunteer and part of the Angel Church from Colombia, from this city, Medellin. And it emerges that Jose was, some years ago, while I was working at Christian Concern in London, was hosting these two ladies in the picture who were exploring ways of defending believers who were coming under some sort of persecution or attack for their faith in Colombia. And while there, unbeknownst to me, Jose was hosting these two ladies. I remember hearing about in the office, our visitors from Colombia, are coming in. Yeah, I did not meet them. I didn't hear anything, but that it went very well. The director of Christian Concern would eventually, I believe, go over to Colombia at some point. I heard about that. Fast forward a few years, COVID time, Jose becomes a part of the Angel Church. He lives in our borough, and he starts telling about this passion for Colombia. He mentions that he has some friends in Colombia who would like to hear from a British church perspective of how to, you know, be reaching the lost in COVID times, during time of pandemic, how to engage with public authorities in a respectful, bold way. And he said, I want to organize this, this with my friends in Colombia. I then get a message from the guys at Christian Concern London saying, we have some people in Colombia who are wanting to organize this, and they've asked specifically if you could join this seminar. Then I'm thinking, hold on, what's going on here? I have Jose saying something about Colombia, Christian Concern telling me something about Colombia. This isn't a coincidence. They're linked. And indeed, they were linked. And so there in that picture, we're finally meeting face to face with the leaders of Christian Concern in Colombia. It was a really blessed time, encouraging time of fellowship to hear a little bit about what they were doing. But Jose has...
Jose's the guy in the check shirt.
Jose's there on the far left with the check shirt, that's right. From Medellin, but has lived in London for a long period of time. lived in Israel as well on a kibbutz for a period, a very massive supporter of Israel. And Jose, a few years ago, visited his hometown in Medellin in Colombia, and went to visit his sister, who was working at this particular school, a Christian initiative that basically has a passion for, and he wanted to introduce me to it and discuss some ministry opportunities.
Excellent. So I have to ask, so you flew into the capital, I take it, in Bogota, and then flew out. What part of Colombia did you visit? Was it in the mountains, the jungle area?
You fly into Bogota, and I think I sent you a WhatsApp when I was landing in Bogota.
You did.
So I was landing in Bogota, and we thought we had a very tight connection, but we were able to make it and fly to the north of Medellin, which is in the mountains. Incredible. The sunrise, beautiful, beautiful place. But Medellin is situated as it's in the mountains, as a city in the valley. So originally the city's there in the valley, and then as the city has expanded, and there's quite a few million inhabitants there, like 4 or 5 million, is what I was being informed is the general estimate. It's kind of hard in some ways to say precisely, but the communities have spread out into the hills, and what you will see in those pictures there, you'll think, what are those buildings? Those are houses, but in the hills and those areas, you would look at them and say, it's very slum-like. The wealthier people live in high-rises. Others live in I've seen garden sheds that have better structure and safety. And so it can be a very impoverished situation, especially in that expansion outside of the valley of Medellin. As you get into the hills area, the communities can themselves be rather cut off.
Excellent. So let's have a look at this CBN news report that looks at the spiritual challenges facing Christians in Colombia, but also the political situation in Colombia as well. And this was from a few years ago.
For 5 decades, Colombia has been at war with Marxist insurgents. Fighting can erupt at any time throughout the scattered war zones. But that doesn't stop an intrepid messenger of peace. Here, actors portray missionary Russell Stendhal on one of his missions in the film La Montaña, The Mountain. For years, Stendhal has taken Christian literature to guerrillas, paramilitary, and government soldiers. He has forged friendships with all sides, and his radio stations and solar-powered receivers paved the way.
To reach areas where it's not possible to have church buildings or scheduled church services, and where it's not possible to do normal missionary or evangelistic work. And so we drop these radios on guerrilla camps and by parachute. We distribute them to soldiers. We distribute them to paramilitary forces.
Stendhal has given out over 120,000 solar-powered radios. Former journalist Dario Silva has followed the conflict for years. He now pastors one of Bogota's larger churches and sends aid to suffering families in rural Colombia. But Silva says there's a disconnect between Colombia's mega churches and the country's isolated and often persecuted believers.
Churches, especially megachurches, have a tendency to be very Laodicean. I have it all. I am rich, right? But they're not aware of the problems our brothers are going through.
Silva says that hardship and persecution have not kept the gospel from reaching the remotest corners of Colombia. In fact, he remembers a guerrilla leader complaining,
"Those Christians are the worst problem we have, because we arrive at a remote part of the country where there is no electricity, no running water or roads or transportation, or a parish house or any political figure, and there's always some nut with a black book under his arm preaching about Jesus."
Here in the mountains and jungles of southwest Colombia, guerrilla fighters are still destroying churches, driving out believers, and killing pastors. Open Doors International says that more pastors have been killed here in Colombia than in any other democratic nation on earth.
This area was home to Helmer, a FARC guerrilla commander known as Comandante Jerónimo.
When I became a commander in the state of Cauca, I unleashed all that atheism against the people of God. expelling pastors, closing churches, killing evangelicals, because they paid no attention to what we wanted them to do, which was to deny Jesus Christ, to deny God.
But after years of persecuting Christians, Helmer realized he had failed.
The more I persecute them, the more they grow, get stronger, multiply. Then I said, how is this? If I'm trying to wipe them out, and they grow more, are fruitful, and make a lot of progress, then I start to doubt.
Those doubts led Helmer to a personal encounter with the Jesus he was persecuting. Today his weapon is a Bible, and he urges people to follow Christ instead of Karl Marx. Stendhal believes that over 100,000 combatants have become followers of Jesus, and the conflict could be reaching a tipping point.
The ones that want to continue with all this violence are having a lot of trouble now because there's enough Christians to really be the salt and the light. What used to be a spiritual black hole, we consider now as at least 10% Christian in most areas.
Indigenous Christians are also spreading the gospel. Alvaro Dagua from the Guambiano tribe manages 2 Christian radio stations. At a recent Christian media conference in Cali, Dagua and fellow Guambianos talked of reaching beyond their own tribe.
If you go into the virgin jungle 3 days on foot, you'll find the Agua tribe that hasn't been civilized. So we want to reach out there with our radio station, with the Word of God, so that the Agua tribe can inhabit the kingdom of heaven.
Meanwhile, government negotiators are meeting with FARC guerrilla leaders in Havana, Cuba, and hope is growing that a peace agreement may soon bring an end to Colombia's 50 years of internal violence. But regardless of the outcome, evangelists, radio, and literature are spreading peace in the nation's conflict zones, one changed life at a time. Stan Jeter, CBN News.
Excellent report there by CBN. As you can tell, it's a few years old, but incredibly relevant still as it looks at the spiritual situation and the political situation in Colombia. We do know that Colombia is a troubled country. We know that it's been the base of operation for FARC. There's also a lot of drug running there as well, with the drug cartels as well. Yeah. And the military situation as well is a precarious situation, including the new potential of a communist president coming in to become. Well,
that's already been established, and that was a massive concern to people that we were speaking to, who it's not only that they're concerned about the Marxist element of this new government, but they're concerned that the new government it also features guerrilla leaders who they've been included in this government. And so you have people who are certifiable terrorists who are a part of this government in deals that have been made since that video was aired. Yeah, I mean, you raise a valid point regarding the drug situation. Just a reminder, and this is what I discovered while there, they don't have an addicted culture. Right, they're not the ones taking the drugs. There's a massive amount of supply, though, that comes out. So here's one guy who we met, and this is just one of many people who they still will wear T-shirts that have pictures of Pablo Escobar, at one time one of the wealthiest men on the face of the earth, because of his drug running of cocaine and.
And you're wearing a Colombian football shirt.
Yeah, my friend Jose, he told me that the local team, Deportivo Medellin, was his team. It then emerged that he doesn't really care that much about it. They were in the final, which was nice. It is a genuinely good team, but everyone else I met supported the other team in Medellin, so that was fun. But yeah, people will still have. I saw a Christmas ornament that had Pablo Escobar's face on it, and so he was a populist, right? He was a populist criminal.
Context. Who is Pablo Escobar?
He was a drug runner. He was a massive dealer across the world, one of the wealthiest drug dealers in history, and he was eventually killed in action that was taken, also featuring some SAS, ex-SAS guys from Britain featured in the plan to assassinate Pablo Escobar, basically. But he had such a grip on that city of Medellin. The whole area was very much affected by his control. He would be very generous, would give jobs to people in his various institutions and organizations. And the cartels across the regions in Colombia had a lot of sway. And so through, you know, his generosity, to some extent, he was gaining the respect of many people. But remember, he also killed and was responsible for the death of thousands along with his henchmen. And so there's, yeah, his presence is still known and felt. Many people very, very negative, many people very positive. But there's one community that I visited with Jose and a couple of others that it's called Comuna 13. There we are walking through Comuna 13, and you can just type in Comuna 13 on Google and do some in-depth research on it. And this was an infamous, notorious region of the city that has undergone a sense of regeneration. Now, I would say that regeneration is primarily superficial. I would say that it's surface level. It's beautiful in one way, but at the same time, the underlying spiritual reality is still very much dead. It's still very much a place that is under a real darkness. You can think of areas like Camden Town in London. If you've been there, that's very near where I live. It reminded me a lot of Camden Town, which a lot of regeneration, a lot of gentrification to some degree, hopping tourist spot now, but still very dark. And it was very much like that at this Comuna 13. But just 20 years ago, there were massive fights that were breaking out because of the guerrillas having taken control of that region. And as it's kind of built in the hills surrounding the city, it's one of those areas that's been cut off from the main center. So the guerrillas controlled it. It's high ground. No one wants to go and try and take over. But eventually the military did have a concerted operation to go in and reclaim Comuna 13 from the guerrillas and crime lords who were there. They succeeded in doing that. But there was loss of life. Kidnapping was a norm in addition to these drug wars.
So what is the state of the church in Colombia that you visited, and what are the issues affecting the church in Colombia? Because we know that different nations, Christians face different issues, the church faces different issues. What is generally the spiritual state of the church in Colombia, and what are the issues that they face?
Well, like much of Colombia, you have heavy influence of Catholicism in its culture. We walked inside a few Roman Catholic churches that were there, but there's also a very heavy and growing sense of disillusionment with Roman Catholicism because of various abuses. One man, he said, look, after we were being guided by him through some rainforest on one day that we had set aside for some recreation, he said, I hate priests. And then I thought, okay, here we go. He's equating my role as a pastor to a priest. But he said, but I have no problem with you guys who are pastors. I said, so tell me, what's the gripe? What's the issue with priests? And he started talking again very much about the abuses of Roman Catholicism there in Colombia. He felt that there was a sense of being very out of touch. That the priests would keep themselves to themselves. They weren't in the communities. They weren't engaging. They weren't having any positive impact. They were taking people's money, and that was pretty much it. There was never any really giving out. And when there's a disaster or when there's a problem, some sort of massive loss of life or upheaval, it's never the Roman Catholic Church that's on the front scene of the disaster zone. They're happy to take people's money, but it's others, oftentimes Protestant churches, that will be out there, and other charities and secular institutions that will be on the front lines in that place. Where we visited another community up in the hills where the school was, there's this initiative that my host is very passionate about. We found that there had been a church that was planted that lasted for about 3 years, like in 2013 to 2016. Tragically, the church closed, but that wasn't due to a shortness of people. They had many people who were tuning in, and disciples seem to have been being made. There are various reasons, I'm sure, that it closed, but there's no gospel witness in this massive area of Colombia, of Medellin, in that city. There's no gospel witness. There are 2 cults, and that's it. And so the opportunity is there. There's a sense of darkness, a sense of despair at times, a sense of we need something more than this. At the same time, Colombia is a very vibrant place, and it was encouraging to see people still had a sense of joy about them.
Amazing. And also, reflecting on your time, what was the response of the Colombian Christians to your visit, knowing that you'd visited them all the way from the UK, and what is their response to kind of Western Christians visiting them?
Yeah, it was so great to meet with those friends from Christian Concern Colombia and meet them face to face. A real highlight, though, of the trip was on the Sunday, where Jose there on the far left, myself, and another guy from church attended a men's retreat from a church there in Medellin, and we were able to spend some quality time speaking, worshiping, just engaging with one another, and they were very hospitable. They were very, very thankful. Colombia has the same problems. South America has very much the same problems that we have, some of the same threats to their churches as we have. Even as the video we saw a little bit ago, there's that sense of Laodicea very, very much there in many places, kind of a reputation, but a deadness at the same time, a sense of being wealthy and prosperous in some cases, but a lukewarmness in real faith. But it was so encouraging to be with believers who did have a strong faith, who love the Lord, and who want to see their city transformed for His glory.
Yeah. Now, you've got to tell them, you sent me this picture, and I on my phone when you're in Colombia, and I thought it was awesome. You do have North American kind of Red Indian, a little bit of a heritage.
There's a bit there.
You're kind of dressing up as a cowboy there and going through the desert. So share with us the riding on horseback through the mountains. So
this was a day
through the jungle.
This was a day that was very generously arranged by my good friend Jose, and we went through this region. We went outside Medellin to a particular area called Armenia, and we rode in the back of a Jeep and to the foot of this valley where there's a river, as you see there. We then got on the horses and rode just to the edge of the rainforest, which we proceeded to walk through. And you have these wooden bridges that, they sway over rope. We saw some collapsed bridges, some bamboo bridges we walked on as well. It was about 14 kilometers trek through the rainforest. I had no expectation that we were going to do that it would be like that. It literally fulfilled a childhood dream, being able to walk on one of these bridges and think, wow, this is very cool. Yeah, so we had a fantastic time, and our guide on that day, as with so many we met, had some really solid conversations. There's an openness there. I think there's a spiritual hunger for real meaningful gospel depth.
Amazing. So what do you take away from your visit to Colombia, would you say?
Well,
Regan?
There's an initiative. I know it won't mean much at the moment to viewers, but maybe in the future I'll be able to share more about it. An initiative called El Arca, the Ark, that is this preschool and it's after school clubs as well that they have, which we attended, and there's so much hope in this Christian initiative that's reaching out to very impoverished kids, getting them educated, some literacy, but there's a desire to plant a church in that same spot where a church previously closed. It's a very spacious center that they have there in that region, and just pray for wisdom that we would be able to think through whether or not we could send out my friend Jose from the Angel Church to go and be a gospel light in his one-time hometown of Medellin.
Very good. So we need to keep Regan, and we also need to keep the Christian community of Colombia in our prayers. And it's good that Regan, you're able to give us a kind of different experience. I mean, particularly for our kind of Latin American viewers watching the program, we'll really appreciate Behind the Headlines. And it's also very good also for American viewers to know really what's happening on the continent of South America, which is so important to American security. Clearly, we haven't talked about the kind of Chinese influence in China, the rise of the Marxism influence. Of course, we've got trouble in Brazil, and America's relationship with South America. But
loads of refugees from other South American countries like Venezuela and Colombia as well.
I can believe so. So anyway, I had the privilege of being invited to attend the 6th Christian Media Summit in Jerusalem, organised by the Israeli Government Press Office, together with the Prime Minister's Office. And essentially what this was inviting Christian broadcasters and journalists around the world to meet together in Jerusalem and to look at some of the issues facing, Israel today. So it was an amazing trip. I mean, I'm left in a kind of freezing fog. Flight was delayed by 3 hours, so I kind of missed the opening bit of the summit, which is always a bit of a shame thing. I mean, this is just a little bit of so this was our first day. So this was Monday. So a full day of lectures, hearing from people like Itamar Marcus. We got an IDF briefing on Israel's security situation. We had a discussion, this one from IDF international spokesperson, Lieutenant Colonel Richard Hett, who was actually born in Glasgow and made Aliyah, and obviously got to that very high position, talking about how Israel's preparing for a future war, possibly against Hamas again, but certainly in the north against Hezbollah. You can't be in Jerusalem without visiting the old city, Ira Hatika, and of course the Western Wall, and that's a place which is very special. And these are a couple of friends that I met from Indonesia and from Philippines. And what's amazing about them is that they stepped out in faith. They didn't have the money, they didn't have the finances to go, but they trusted the Lord would open the door, and he opened that door for them. So that's and that was a beautiful evening in just by the plateau there. So there's a picture of me in Jerusalem, which was incredible. But it's my first visit that I've been to Israel since 2019.
Had you been at this time of year before, December?
Yeah, with the Revelation TV tour of 2017. So we're around this time, and of course there's the beach of Herzliya, 22 degrees last Friday. So just managed to see my Israeli friends on the Friday before I flew out. Stayed with them on the Thursday night. This is actually inside the Israeli Foreign Ministry, and this is a memorial to the fallen diplomats who have been killed or murdered on active service. And that was a real privilege for me to actually see have a personal tour of the Israeli Foreign Ministry in Jerusalem, which was quite incredible. There's some of you might recognize John Haller, American Bible prophecy teacher. It was great to spend time with him, as well as my new friend Dmitry from the Ukraine, who was able to give me kind of first-hand account of all the troubles that went in Ukraine. He's got a wonderful heart, he's got a wonderful church, and this is us in front of the Knesset, as we were dressed by Knesset members, including the controversial Ben-Gvir.
So what was your take on that?
He had a dark presence about him. So as soon as he came in and addressed us in one of the committee rooms, had a presence about him, always looked to see the people that he surrounds himself with, i.e. his henchmen. And I was troubled. He had a dark presence about him. I think the Messianic Jewish community are very concerned about him being given the position of the Interior Minister. So in terms of dealing with crime, internal terrorism, the Israelis are concerned, moderate Israelis are concerned about how, for example, Israel will now be perceived with him in the position of influence.
Has a reputation as being a religious extremist.
Of course, and of course the Messianic Jewish community are very concerned and scared. But as I was saying to people, that usually when you're involved in politics, particularly Israeli politics, it's very much based on the party that you're in. But with Itamar Ben-Gvir, it's not. He represents a movement. And when you have when you represent a movement, that is not a political party. So therefore, his reputation, his followers would decline if he moderated himself in office and was willing to work well with the new government led by Benjamin Netanyahu. Then he would lose his supporters, and he would lose everything that he stands for. So I can't see that happening. I think he'll use that position because he's a populist, and he also knows who his supporters are, and I think he'll be no different to how he was as just a kind of rebel MK to being a minister in the Israeli government. I can't see any difference between the two, and I can see him giving Benjamin Netanyahu huge problems, and that's why I think they are now developing legislation before this government is formed in order to curtail his rhetoric and his situation to inflame. I mean, he even called for war against Hamas and Hezbollah. You know, while he was speaking to us. Now, yeah, if we want to see Hezbollah gone, of course we want to see Hezbollah destroyed, Hamas destroyed. But the question and the problem Israel has is that, particularly in Gaza, is if you get rid of Hamas, who replaces Hamas? And the great danger is that someone like ISIS would replace that, even worse. So we do have a video I can show you, and this is an excellent CBN News report about the Christian Media Summit.
This annual gathering began as a forum to share values and concerns between Jewish people and Christians in the media.
It's important, first of all, because Jesus was a Jew.
Israel's government press office sponsors the summit and hosted nearly 120 people from more than 25 countries this year.
We need to persuade lots of Christian media to come to Israel, to get to know the Israeli society, because when we have battles and military operation, and even in a peace process period, we need more media world to talk about Israel in a positive way.
At the opening night event, CBN News talked with visitors about why they attended the summit.
Norway is a country where we have a lot of lies produced by the media about Israel. So what we are called to do is just to speak the truth.
It's bringing together television professionals and execs from around the world, right here in the epicenter of it all in Israel, to talk about updates, what's going on, how can we build stronger relationships with Israel.
Some noted the importance for journalists to see and learn about Israel firsthand, rather than basing decisions on other sources.
If you stay in your country and you keep watching your national or international news network, they will not tell you the truth about the region. The only way to connect with the reality is to come.
We still need some voice in the East African region, in Africa, to tell the news of what is going on in Israel, because there's so much negative media out there. So it's good when you come, experience it, and then you go back and tell the story of Israel.
During the summit, participants had the opportunity to learn the latest in Israeli innovations, the danger Iran poses to the Jewish state, and the growth of anti-Semitism. An older battle than even the danger of a nuclear Iran is the ancient scourge of anti-Semitism, the hatred of the Jews.
Historically, what starts with anti-Semitism ends up denying the rights and causing terror for many, many different minorities. So that's why this summit is so important, to lift our voices, to speak out against anti-Semitism, and to declare that racism in any form is unacceptable.
They also had the opportunity to visit an IDF military base, see a replica of a Gaza city, and tour models of Hamas tunnels where Israeli soldiers now train to fight and defend Israel. Journalists also heard from Israelis in Nirim, a community close to the Gaza perimeter fence. Residents told them about living under the threat of rockets. And since these are Christian journalists, they felt the need to learn about God's perspective on Israel and the Middle East.
It's important to understand what God is doing now in Israel and the Middle East, and what are the best way to reflect this through our media channel that we have in Romania.
So we can then report more of the news of what's happening with a greater insight, so that it can encourage more people to pray and intercede into some of the very tough political situations that Israel faces.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, the Christian Media Summit, Jerusalem.
Oh, it's fascinating. I'm really glad you were able to go and have that experience, particularly going through that replica Gaza I mean, that's incredible how they do the training in that environment.
Well, this is highlight, so I'm just going to read out the itinerary. So on Tuesday, the 13th of December, we had to leave the hotel in Jerusalem at 8 o'clock to depart to the south, where we actually went to an Israeli military base right on the border of Gaza. And this was the big kind of tank base, tank regiment. You can see that I actually got a lift with an IDF general. So Hadassah, who works for the Israeli government press office, saying, Simon, instead of taking the coach, do you want to go in the Jeep with the general? So I said, yes, of course, and I want to go in the Jeep with the general. So that was pretty cool. So there's me in the Jeep, and then the general was actually IDF general was actually driving in one of those tanks around. So it's one of the tanks that we had a look at, Makiva tank, one of Israel's tanks they use in military operations. And the thing is, what they also do, and of course you also think, for example, that they've actually built a replica of Gaza, so that the Israeli soldiers know how to train and prepare themselves for when they have to go into military operations into Gaza. So it's a very kind of frightening experience, but it also was built 10 years ago to equip soldiers to have an understanding of what they're dealing with. So thanks to Hugh Kitson, he recorded this on his phone. This is me reporting from an Israeli army base close to the Gaza Strip. Where we are now is incredibly close to the Gaza Strip, and what we're seeing here around us is Israeli military training base that is mocked up as Gaza City, so that the Israeli soldiers know exactly what they're going into when they go into a military operation into Gaza to confront the Islamist terrorist organisation Hamas. And we've just come out of a mock terror tunnel to give the Israeli soldiers an understanding of what the Hamas tunnels are actually like. So it gives you a bit more of a perspective of how the Israeli soldiers train for military operations, particularly confronting such a far enemy such as Hamas.
Almost as good as in Indonesia.
And as you can see from the graffiti there, this gives an understanding for the Israeli soldiers of what this mock city of Gaza looks like. And of course around here we have the minarets, the call to prayer, to make it feel as if we're actually in Gaza ourselves. And it gives us also an understanding of how dense everything is. Everything's so close together, the buildings are so close together, and gives us a greater understanding of what Israeli soldiers have to fight when they have to fight what is essentially an urban warfare battle against the Hamas terrorists in Gaza.
Really fascinating. You say that Fauda, I believe it's about Mossad, the Netflix series.
About Shin Bet.
Right, okay.
Israel's internal security dealing with kind of Palestinian terrorism in Judea and Samaria, but also in Gaza as well. So
that was filmed there on that.
They filmed some of that. Probably when the series relates to Gaza, they actually filmed there. But I mean, it makes perfect sense that you'd have that there. I mean, we were also addressed by the IDF general, who I got to have a little bit of a conversation with in the Jeep, and asked him when he actually joined the IDF as a reservist in '77, and he fought in the 1982 Lebanon war. He said he was kind of badly injured, a kind of bullet went through his hand and stuff as well during that war, and he found that war a very, very difficult war. But the interesting thing is, for example, what he mentions there so much is that the IDF is a moral army. Our morality is what we indoctrinate our soldiers with. Do not shoot unless your life depends on it. Be cautious in what situations you're going into. So if we're, and even, for example, Colonel Richard Kemp has described Israel as is the most moral army in the world. And let's remember, Israel doesn't have an army. It has a defence force. It's called the Israeli Defence Force. The British Army is called the British Army. So they're there to defend the state, they're there to defend the nation, and you just look at the range of tanks that they had in the hangars, and then constantly we had kind of F-35s fly by over our heads at the army base, obviously monitoring the situation there in Gaza. But when you actually get close to the communities, and this is probably one of the biggest highlights for me, is when we went to the region of Efrat, southern Israel, and we went to a kibbutz called Kibbutz Nevim, and we had a walk around the kibbutz, and you could see the border with Gaza there because it was so close, and the trauma that has inflicted upon the local Jewish communities, with the rockets and missiles firing over them, having to constantly deal with this threat from Hamas, and also their resilience. I mean, they were saying that this place is paradise. It's like heaven 99% of the time. Just that 1% is horrific. And yeah, we had dinner with them, and I was having this burning question in my heart to ask them a question, and to the panel that represented the mayor of the region. They also had the members of the local community, including the head of security there. And I said, look, I don't want to ask you. I don't have a question. I have more of a statement to say. I'm saying you are thanking us for being here, to listening to your stories, but it's us who need to thank you, because you are on the front line of defense. If you and your communities pulled out under threat of Hamas's rockets and terrorism, Israel as a nation would capitulate to terror, but you stay there despite the threats. You're on the front line, and if you weren't on the front line pushing back these Islamic extremists, then this would come to Europe and the West. And so it's us that need to thank you for living here and keeping the kind of terrorists at bay. And then you kind of realize that Israel's in a different light. And the fact that one of the speakers was saying how for the children, they sing a song to ensure that they don't get scared, they don't get frightened. They've only got between 12 seconds to get to a bomb shelter or their own room. I mean, circumstances that you really find it difficult that anyone could actually endure, and the psychological damage of this. And all the time, the Israelis are saying, look, Gaza could be the next Singapore. Why do you spend billions and billions of pounds that you're given in aid money to build these terror tunnels? And they're frightening. Those terror tunnels went for miles into Israeli territory, where they were going to use them to murder Israelis. There's giving you an example. They're very short. And it's the Israelis that supply them with the cement to build these tunnels so they can build it. So, I mean, in Gaza, they could have built hotels. Mm-hmm. They could have spent this money on hospitals, on schools and education, and create a kind of innovative hub. But instead, they use Gaza, and this is Hamas, use Gaza as a military operations to attack Israel.
The past Gaza was popular for some people to go and spend time for holiday. I mean, we have to remember it's only in relatively recent history that Israeli troops withdrew from Gaza. And so, you know, that's people who act like Israel is not willing to do things, or act like it's not been willing to give away ground in some way in this ongoing conflict, need to reflect on that this is what's happened when Israel has withdrawn and when Hamas has entered in Gaza. This is the result. In Israel, you see growth, you see a real measure of prosperity in various ways. In Gaza, you see investment not in the things that are really needed, but in terror tunnels.
And rockets and missiles.
Yeah.
I mean, put this in context, that Israel pulled out 12,000 of its Jewish community in 2005 from Gaza, together with over 18 million pounds worth of what is known as a kind of greenhouses where they grew vegetables. As soon as those communities pulled out, the Gaza terrorists came in and totally destroyed 18 million pounds worth of vegetables, which is enough to build a bit of a small economy for the people of Gaza. And then in 2007, Fatah lost the parliamentary elections, which is the ruling faction of the Palestinian Authority. Hamas won, and Hamas then thought, right, you haven't given us this our rule and power, so they overthrew Fatah in 2007 threw Fatah members off the roofs of buildings, and so we had a coup d'etat. And ever since then, Hamas has used Gaza to fire rockets and missiles into Israeli areas. And when you kind of see what Israel has become, it's incredible. I haven't been to Israel since 2019, and you just look at the innovation in the country and what's happened. But for those of you who are interested in archaeology, what was really interesting is that we were taken to the site of the Siloam pool where Jesus heals the sick man, and this hasn't been open to the public. So what they managed to found is the road, the highway that goes up from the pool of Siloam all the way up to the Temple Mount. And they found little like stores at the edge of the road, like souvenir stores and everything else. They found the running water, and they found the road that would have taken the pilgrims up to the temple on that road. So that was a fascinating insight to see that as well. It was great to be in the Knesset. We were supposed to be dressed by the Israeli Prime Minister to-be, Benjamin Netanyahu, twice. On twice occasions he kind of didn't turn up. I just think also that the Christians aren't as influential now as they were before when President Trump was in power and the Democrats in power. So they're different slants. But the one great thing about the conference and the meeting is not only do you get to know about the current situations facing Israel politically and also Israel's economy and some of the social issues, but you also are be able to meet with fellow broadcasters and journalists who are Christians around the world. And previous years I've gotten very well with Eric Steckelbeck, who's been a friend of mine for a long time, and this time I had a good time spending with John Haller and others, and you get to know Christians from different nations, like in Germany as well, what they're doing for Israel and others, and some of the other challenges that they face as well. So that's one of the special times, really.
So what was your big takeaway from this event, Simon, and why are such events for Christian journalists in Israel so important?
Well, I think Israel recognises, and this is what's so important, is that relationship. And the highlight for me was I worked with a wonderful woman called Vivi at the Israeli Embassy in London. She was the head of public affairs. And she invited me for a personal tour of the foreign ministry in downtown Jerusalem, and that was very special, and that's what I've taken away the most. And now she's kind of head of operations for South America, but it's that friendships you're able to build by telling the truth about Israel, by fighting Israel's cause, that they kind of recognise that. So to be to be invited to have a look around the foreign ministry and to say, well, this is the state room, and this is our media operations, and this is where the diplomats are based. You come away thinking like, this is really important. This is really important, and the Israeli government did roll out the red carpet for us. They kind of value the role that Christian media plays in telling their narrative, and then narrative needs to be told, and also the sense of kind of friendship between the state of Israel and the Christian community worldwide. So that is what I kind of take away from the fact that Israel is going through incredible innovation right now.
So there were 120 different people at this event. How many nations, media outlets would have been represented?
A lot. So we saw then with that news video that CBN put news items. We've got CBN were kind of represented there. Kind of American journalists were also represented quite a lot. There was also one correspondent who writes for one of the big Christian newspapers in Sweden, as well as a great guy from Croatia who works for a Catholic newspaper there, was also invited. We had some from delegates from Africa as well. So really mainly American, but North America, but also European and a few other nations.
Of course,
as well.
Indonesia,
Philippines as well, and this is to express God's love for His land and His people. So to be back there just before Hanukkah, was very special. Yeah, very special.
And what do you think in regard to the next year Christians should particularly be praying into in relation to Israel?
Well, the situation that we're told again was Iran. It's the threat of the Islamic Republic of Iran reaching nuclear breakout that fears the Israelis. So that is something that they're very concerned about. Their support for Hezbollah, their support for Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad and terrorism around the world and their menace. So the big threat, I think, was for Israel externally is the threat of Iran. Internally, the nation is very, very much divided, despite the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu won election and formed the coalition, and possibly now will go into a coalition government with Itamar Ben-Gvir and some of more of the religious parties that very much concerns a lot of kind of liberal and Israelis on the kind of centre of the political perspective. And that's a challenge. And of course, again, the challenge of getting Israel's message out and truth out, knowing that a conflict can flare up at any moment in the Middle East. And of course, the success of the Abraham Accords as well. Sorry.
Yeah, and I mean, in regard to the Abraham Accords, we are seeing there are encouraging signs of more normalization, relationships between Israel and other nations that historically it's not had a great relationship with. I believe in the next year, in the next couple of years anyway, there's an expectation that citizens of Israel will be able to travel to Saudi Arabia on their Israeli passports. Well, I mean, now already, I know I was talking with someone recently who is an Israeli citizen, a dual citizen though, of Britain, and he was able for the first time to go and see some of the biblical sites in Saudi Arabia. So that's been encouraging to come see that development. But Iran definitely has all of this year, it's been on our radar, even as we were looking forward to 2022, some of the big news stories to keep an eye out on, you know, its nuclear program, the potential of an attack on Israel, or a preemptive strike by Israel against Iran and its nuclear sites. Those are all still very live issues.
Absolutely. And of course the plight of women in Iran as well is a major issue, and you know, what we saw from there is the Israeli people's desire to reach out to the people of Iran, to reach out to the women of Iran who are facing unprecedented persecution, as well as the church as well in Iran, which is suffering incredible persecution.
One of the encouraging things from my conversations with Iranian believers is that consistently they do recognize the support that Israel has been to, and it has extended, completely unmerited by in relation to the Iranian government. But the Iranian people in many cases do recognize that Israel has extended its hand. It's offered help during its water crises. It's offered support in regard to the human rights. It's challenged many of the Ayatollah's abuses. And the people, I think in many cases, do see Israel as a friend, but the Ayatollahs and of course the military are very much actively seeking Israel's destruction, and as you've already mentioned, you know, massive state-sponsored terrorism we see of Hamas and Hezbollah.
Absolutely, and of course the other thing we saw as well is the incredibly healthy state of Israel's economy. I mean, Israel is now certainly leading the world in kind of economic growth, economic development, innovation, startup nation. The amount of wealth now that's coming into Israel is kind of unprecedented. And of course, we know that this has to happen in fulfillment of biblical prophecy as well. But Israel is a nation that's certainly been blessed. And our viewers watching, if you've never been to Israel, or if you have fears about Israel, about being in Israel because of the safety aspect, trust me, it's safer than Britain. And you've got a very powerful army to protect you. So all I can do is encourage you to in 2023 is definitely take a visit to Israel, and you know, God's presence is there, and what he's doing through the nation of Israel through biblical prophecy is very powerful and amazing to see for yourself.
You know, maybe think of if Revelation TV does another tour at some point in the near
you were on with Tim last week, you should have asked him.
Yeah, I should have asked him. Yeah, I'm sure you can find out. Write in and encourage maybe, and but I'm sure that would be a very good start to think of how you could travel maybe with a group and see. It's unlike any other place. As you walk in, you see the history in just such an amazing way, and you're living out in many ways as you're walking. You're just imagining the biblical panorama that's there.
Absolutely. Regan, it's great that we've been able to discuss our foreign adventures with our viewers on tonight's Behind the Headlines. Hopefully it wasn't like a tourist holiday slides back in the 80s where you had to endure hours of watching people's slides and pictures. So we pray that you have gained something from this program. Regan, great to do a program with you, and great to do a program. So I wish you and your family a wonderful Christmas and Hag Sameach for Hanukkah as well.
Yes, yeah.
Your wife.
Thank you very much. We attended a menorah lighting locally the other day. Hag Sameach to you as well.
And I want to thank you for watching Behind the Headlines. We want to wish our viewers a very happy Christmas and pray that you'd have a peaceful and a really nice Christmas, and also to our Jewish viewers as well, and Hag Sameach for Hanukkah as well. So thank you for watching this week's edition of Behind the Headlines. So shalom and God bless.